The courtroom was buzzing with the low murmur of whispers, the faint shuffle of papers, and the impatient tapping of shoes against polished floors. Outside, the sun was glaring, unforgiving and bright, and inside, tension clung to the air like a thick fog. Mariah James walked into the courthouse that morning with a heart full of anxiety and a lifetime of stories tucked into her worn briefcase. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a woman who had fought tooth and nail to become a lawyer, a woman who had grown up seeing doors slammed in her family's faces simply because of the color of her skin. But today, she wasn't there to argue a case. Today, she was there as a defendant. Seconds after she stepped inside, two uniformed officers approached her with smirks that barely masked a cruel amusement. "You can't just walk in here like you own the place." One of them sneered, his voice sharp, as he roughly guided her toward the holding area. They cuffed her, their hands heavy on her wrists, and the murmurs in the courtroom shifted into uncomfortable stares. Mariah felt a familiar sting, not from the cuffs, but from the weight of disbelief. This wasn't just injustice. This was performative humiliation, an attempt to make her small. As they shoved her toward a bench, she steadied herself against the shock running through her body. She had faced injustice before, yes, but this was different. It was public, blatant, and meant to shame. Yet, even as the anger bubbled inside her, a strange clarity settled over her. Something inside whispered, "You've earned your place. You belong here." And with that thought, Mariah made a decision that would leave everyone in the room frozen. While the officers argued quietly among themselves, she slipped from their grip, not with panic but with purpose. She strode past the murmuring crowd, the intimidating officers, and straight to the judge's bench. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the robe, hanging neatly behind the bench, but her eyes were steady, her posture unwavering. She pulled the robe over her shoulders, adjusted the collar, and sat down. The room went completely silent. Papers fluttered to the floor, pen rolled off the clerk's desk, and even the officers looked as though they had been caught in a dream they couldn't wake from. One officer finally stammered, "Step down from." Mariah raised a hand, her voice calm, but carrying an unshakable authority. "I am the judge for this courtroom today," she said simply, as if stating a fact too obvious to argue. The irony was sharp, bitter, and undeniably poetic. She could feel the heat of every eye on her, the mingling of fear, confusion, and awe. Her mind raced back to the early mornings and late nights she had spent studying law, to the nights she cried quietly over cases she couldn't win, to the whispers that told her she would never make it because the world wasn't ready for someone like her. And yet here she was, reclaiming her dignity not with violence or anger, but with the undeniable force of her own presence. The judge, an older man with decades of experience, watched her with something that looked like cautious respect. He had been presiding over this court for years, and he had seen tension and defiance, never like this. Mariah didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't try to humiliate anyone in return. She simply sat, silent and resolute, letting the room absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. Minutes later, after a tense pause, she spoke again. "This courtroom is meant for justice, not spectacle. If we cannot treat one another with dignity, then we have failed the very principle we are sworn to uphold." Her words cut through the tension, echoing in the silent room. The officers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to enforce their previous authority or acknowledge hers. Slowly, they lowered their hands, realizing that the power they had sought to wield over her had evaporated. The moment she refused to submit to fear, what happened next wasn't chaos, but a transformation. The courtroom that had been a stage for humiliation became a space for reflection. Witnesses, lawyers, and even the officers began to understand. In that suspended moment, that respect and courage were forces stronger than any uniform or threat. The judge, finally reclaiming his seat, nodded at Mariah with a quiet reverence, and she returned his nod with a calm smile. After that day, Mariah's story spread far beyond the courthouse walls. She didn't become famous because she defied authority in a dramatic gesture. She became a symbol of unshakable courage, a reminder that dignity is not given, it is claimed. She continued her work as a lawyer, representing those who had been silenced, marginalized, or dismissed. But she carried herself differently now, less with fear, more with the certainty that she had already proven her worth in the most profound way possible. Her experience in that courtroom became a lesson for everyone who heard it, that injustice cannot thrive where courage stands, that power is not about intimidation, and that sometimes taking your rightful place is the most revolutionary act of all. And as Mariah looked back at that day years later, she remembered not the fear, the fire that had carried her from the edge of humiliation to the very seat of authority, and the quiet, transformative power of simply refusing to be diminished.